The Bigfoot subject is one that I can't get out of my head. It's just something that I've been up here for so long now, and I've seen a lot of big animals, a lot of big creatures. Big grizzlies, big eagles, everything. And they're powerful, and up close, they're just incredibly phenomenal. But when you see something big and incredible that you can't explain and you can't get out of your mind, and it raises all the fear, flight, and flight senses. And when I first seen mine, I almost hit the brakes at 75 miles an hour. And it was all in a matter of seconds, because I was traveling, heading east on the highway on the right-hand side, and this creature was all the way over, the lane over, into the ditch. Now, when I first seen it, it was broad, like I said, it's about 7 o'clock in the evening, so we had plenty of light during the summer. I seen it off the distance, and I thought it was a large Shetland type pony with long hair, and then I figured it must have been an Icelandic, like an Icelandic pony. And it was like real dreadlocked. It was long, streamy hair. It was ochre, real dark red ochre. Now this thing was built. You could just see the pumped belly on it, the arms, and the length of the arms. I could see through underneath the belly of this creature, where the hair still had plenty of distance between that and the ground. Now, this is all I seen as I was driving by at 75 miles an hour. I immediately looked into the rear view mirror and to see if I could get a clearer picture of what I'd just seen. And it was right in the middle of the highway. It had jumped in less than it's about a second and a half. It had jumped all the way from about, I'd say 40 feet down into a ditch, up onto the center line, and was completely profile looking down the highway. When I first seen this thing, it was looking down towards the ground and away from the road, and I could not see the head. But where the horse's head was supposed to be was not. It was just bulky and thick and looking down. I said, well, I never thought for a second it was a bear. It was too big. And then I looked back into the mirror and I was watching it. For that very second, it was perfectly profiled. There must have been at least 24 inches between the dread of the hairs and the space of the road, because I could see clearly down the road. And it was looking down the highway from whence we came. There was no traffic on the road either way, forward or backwards. As soon as I see it in the highway, that's when I reached up and grabbed my foot and I was ready to, and I busted brake pedals before stopping fast. And I took my foot off and looked back again, and this thing was descending down the bank on the other side. Its rump raised up in the air, its back legs up high, and its lower legs down this way. Never at any time did I see it on 4 legs. And I didn't see the face. But this was real. So, how do you get something like that out of your mind? I was ready to chase it down. I was young enough to do it. I'd been guiding and commercial fishing and just running amok with horses and animals all my life. I was ready to chase this thing down, and I know the trail.
If you could relive that moment, what would you do different?
I would have hit the brakes and turned around and chased it down. So, but this was a creature. And it wasn't, like I said, I've been up here for 49 years, and I spent most of my time around what life there is up here. And I don't expect to ever see something like that again. But who knows?
In terms of pluses and minuses of something like Sasquatch being discovered in Alaska, I think it just makes sense. I think most people probably wouldn't be surprised because Alaska has that reputation, that mystique as that final frontier. It's a place where so many people, especially from the lower 48, go up there, and it has like a special place in their minds. People go there to escape. It's that kind of, it's the last stop on the road sort of thing. So I think people wouldn't be surprised by something like Sasquatch being in a place like Alaska. Many people I've talked to that are, not into the topic of Sasquatch oh yeah, Alaska, that's where they'd be, sort of thing.
Sasquatches, being omnivores, have their pick of what they want to eat, essentially. The salmon runs are still largely unspoilt up there, so like literally upstream, there's going to be dead salmon laying on the side of streams. The grizzly bears, of course, are catching them, and Sasquatches may very well do that as well. Look at the diet of the big brown bears. The diets of those bears are sure largely fish dependent and things, but they have a huge variety of plants that they eat as well.
From the Kenai Peninsula, even Kodiak Islands, that whole area, down up into Canada, Southeast Alaska, some of the richest environments in the world in terms of temperate rainforest. Absolutely perfect places for something like a Sasquatch to live. And in parts of the interior, there are great habitats as well.
Areas like Fairbanks, interior Alaska, it gets incredibly cold, 40, 50 below. It's really hard to imagine anything surviving out there, let alone a Sasquatch. Southeast Juneau, Ketchikan, even where my buddy's cabin is outside of Seward, the environment is a lot more rainforesty. You'll recognize right away when you go into these areas, wow, and they're secluded. The temperatures are more mild, and we're not talking like interior Fairbanks weather. Juneau is definitely more mild, so I think that plays a lot to do with it, it seems. And like I said, these places seem to, the fish are available. It's kind of like a grizzly bear versus a brown bear.
Kind of an analogy between grizzly bears and brown bears. So brown bears live very close to the coast. So their diet is very rich because they have terrestrial food sources and aquatic food sources, right? So they have access to salmon, fish. We know fish oil and that sort of stuff is extremely healthy for animals, especially carnivores. So brown bears grow bigger than grizzly bears. Grizzly bears live inland. They have to fight a little bit more for their food sources, so that's why they're called grizzly.
I think it's kind of like that. I think it is similar to, I could see how they would hang out in a more mild area versus up north or, Barrow or something that's just frozen all the time. Although I've heard stories from there.
So I thought, well, maybe is it a similar case with a Sasquatch? If you lived in a peninsula like the Kenai Peninsula, essentially in one of these coves, you don't have to go anywhere. You can stay there the whole time and you've got all your food sources in the water and on land. Whereas inland, you may have to move a little, you may have to follow the caribou herds, or you may have to, follow the other food sources. A little bit more, it just seemed like a more difficult existence.
If you look at other predator behavior, I have no reason to believe Sasquatch would not follow those same types of behavior. I do believe that Bigfoot are omnivorous, so they probably are opportunistic eaters. Most of the accounts that I am aware of, both historically and in more recent times, are around September and August, which is when berries are out and caribou are migrating, especially in the far north above the Arctic Circle. So I definitely believe that Sasquatch tend to follow caribou herds for food, and I think they're also in those same areas because that's also where there's a lot of berries, blueberries, high bush cranberries, things that are going to be highly nutritious and fattening up, just like bears would that time of year for winter when things are lean.
I mean, obviously, Alaska is not a friendly environment for anything, for anyone, for anything. It's very cruel and can be very cruel. And so there have been sightings that I've discovered in my research as far north as Barrow, and then there's others in the interior farther up around Fairbanks. But it seems to me they move more in the interior in better weather. One thing I've kind of been examining that I've talked to other researchers about is we've discussed the possibility of hibernation or modified hibernation. That's one thing I really looked into. And matter of fact, the University of Alaska Fairbanks had a program they were working on with trying to figure out induced hibernation for deep space travel. They were actively working on that up there. I think they still are to some extent. Would it be so far-fetched to believe that maybe a being like this could have developed the ability through necessity, especially in the interior regions, to do that, that modified hibernation, not full-blown hibernation, but maybe a modified where they get up and move around limited areas, do what they need to do, gather food sources and stuff like that.
We were moose hunting, and I was probably going 2-3 miles an hour. We see this big bull moose just kind of charge out in front of us, and he literally ran through there and went into the tree line, kind of like right here, and just stopped. I take the flashlight, shine it over here, have the scope aimed at this thing, and I got just these big eyes.
Sasquatches are certainly in Alaska, and they're certainly walking around, and they certainly leave footprints. They're going to be discovered eventually. They're absolutely real animals. Some scared hunter will pull a trigger someday, or a logging truck will run one over on the way to work.
But that night, when we heard that noise out there, it sounded like there was a baby out there. I was about 6 feet away from it, and I looked up, something made me look up, and it was above the window, and it stood there and looked at us.
Imagine one of these things mimicking a baby to draw out a woman preying against her natural instincts. You know, what would be the point of luring them out, especially mimicking a baby they know?
I was given a bunch of audio files by the property owner, and one of the creepiest ones was what sounds like a baby crying. This baby crying sound was only ever heard or recorded on or around the time women were present on the property. So that then takes you back to Alaskan native stories. Don't go into the woods when you hear crying.
The one that stood up on me followed me. I had this like instant fear, like I was about to die.